Good morning and a very warm welcome to EU Democracy Reform Conversations, a series of online events organised by the EU Democracy Reform Observatory, a joint initiative of the Bertelsmann Stiftung, the European Policy Centre, the King Baudouin Foundation and Stiftung Mercator, to foster debate on modernising European democracy in the wake of the Conference on the Future of Europe. My name is Jackie Davis. I have the privilege of moderating all our discussions on this topic. And for those of you who have attended one of these events before, you will know an entirely interactive conversation. I'll have some questions for our panel, but I also hope we will take some questions from you as we discuss breaking the invisible ceiling, overcoming political obstacles to citizen-driven EU reform. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get underway. If you want to ask a question, please click on the raised hands button and I will ask you if you want to do it orally, and I will ask you to unmute yourself when the time comes. Otherwise, please use the Q&A button, not the chat, the Q&A, and please keep your questions as brief as possible. And the social media hashtag, if you would like to send out messages. I wanted to say tweet. I always want to say tweet about what you are hearing here. The hashtag is Democracy Reform Conversations. So we're delighted to welcome for this edition of the conversation, Sandro Gozi, MEP, who is the European Democratic Party's lead candidate for the Renew Europe group in the European elections, and among other things, a member of the European Parliament's Constitutional Affairs Committee. Thank you, Sandro. I know it's a very busy time, so we are particularly grateful to have you with us here today. Janis Emmanouilidis, Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Studies at the European Policy Centre. Corina Stratulat, who is Senior Policy Analyst and Head of the EPC's. Your title's changed and I haven't changed it. She's now Associate Director and Head of the EPC's European Politics and Institutions Programme. Apologies, Corina. And last but very much not least, Andrey Demidov, Project Manager at the Bertelsmann Stiftung. So let's jump in, lots to talk about. Before we come to discuss the intriguing title of our session today, which is linked to a paper recently published by the Democracy Reform Observatory, let's go back to basics. Why, Sandro, is it so important to be having these conversations about how to involve citizens in the EU reform and policy debate? And what do you think the consequences are if we don't find ways to give citizens a greater say?
It is very important because we want to strengthen the European Union dimension. We want to strengthen the European Union. We are talking about a European power. We're talking about a military power at European level. All this require a refreshed legitimacy. All this require a strength and enhanced legitimacy. You cannot talk about deepening the European integration process without thinking also out of the box on how to increase its legitimacy. And I think that this is the key question. It is impossible to forget that we have to proceed on a parallel track. The more we want to do as European, the better we have to do in terms of democratic participation. And as we will see all along the debate, I guess this is absolutely not building something which is an alternative to the traditional representative democracy. This is something that is going to refresh, strengthen, expand the field of democratic action, and therefore is going to also regenerate the representative democracy. So I think that we have to conclude, we have to think about two issues. No more European power without more citizen participation. And direct citizen participation is there to help to strengthen representative democracy and to have a better democracy in general.
Thank you very much. And we'll come back to that. And you very much making that link there between the European Union's ambitions for itself and this process, which is also a link, Corina, that is very much made in your paper. It's entitled, which is where we got the title of this event, Participatory Democracy at the EU Level, How to Break the Invisible Ceiling, What is that invisible ceiling that you and Janis in that paper refer to? And what are you call them structural impediments that are creating that ceiling that we need to break? Can you briefly outline for us what those structural impediments are?
Yes, Jackie, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Well, the invisible ceiling essentially refers to a number of fundamental political and institutional obstacles that basically prevent the EU from getting serious about democratic reform, including the possibility of making European policy making more participatory. And in the paper, we focus on three main such obstacles, or structural impediments, as you called them, which incidentally, we think are the same kind of hurdles that also hold back European integration. And they include, more specifically, first, multiple fears of power castration at both the European and national levels regarding the potential consequences of more participatory EU democracy on the interinstitutional balance of power between the different actors and tiers of governance. So this basically means that national capitals, but also different EU institutions, are fear of seeing their powers and their prerogatives being undermined by more participatory democracy. Second, diverging views, perceptions, and positions regarding the potential role and limits of citizens' participation in the democratic polity. So this basically means that EU countries and institutions do not seem to agree on what should be done to improve European democracy and what role citizens' participation can play in that process. And third and finally, we mention what we call an imagination deficit, which is basically to say that, in our opinion, member states and EU institutions cannot really think cannot really envision, or do not allow themselves, do not have the courage to envision and implement a different future, meaning to formulate, but also to promote and then implement changes, systemic sometimes changes that would essentially result in a different way of going about doing policy in the EU and about the way different institutions and the European Union functions.
Sure.
And together, I would say that these basically translate into short-termism. They translate into a high degree of risk aversion and basically status quo thinking. So this is why it's a ceiling, because it blocks us from moving forward, from advancing.
And you say status quo thinking. Indeed, the paper contains a stark warning about the need for change. And I'm quoting here when it says, inertia must be overcome if European liberal democracy is to survive for future generations. So you are saying, in answer to the same question I asked Sandro, the stakes could not be higher. It matters for our very future of the EU and of liberal democracy. Just a quick follow-up, and then Janis, I'll come to you.
Yeah, definitely. But I would say that, look, it is very important to think outside of the box and also to really consider citizen participation as one potential avenue of exploring EU democracy reform, because of three main reasons, I would say. The first has to do with the fact that I feel that European leaders can no longer rely on on citizens' tacit support for the work, the decisions that they need to take. The earlier permissive consensus, of the past decades is gone, and we are at a point in time where we face very, very important, critical, difficult, costly choices. And for that, if you want people to be on board, if you want people to have a buy-in into what you're doing, then you need to keep them informed, to keep them involved, it's critical. The second reason is also that people themselves want to be involved. I mean, if and this is an outcome that has that we have seen out of all the recent experiments with citizen participation instruments, and it's also a recurrent finding of public opinion polls. And when I say that people want to be involved, it's not 20-30% of those surveyed who say that they want to be included and consulted and have a voice in decision making.
Okay.
We're talking about over 70% of people normally who express such a wish. And finally, and very briefly, it's half a sentence to say that also it's actually with the experience so far demonstrates that involving people has added value. As a result of consulting with people, policymaking can be better. People are capable of engaging with complex issues, are capable of coming up with solutions, and sometimes they're even more ambitious than politicians. So it can be a help to decision-making and to representative democracy, as Sandro Gozi just mentioned.
Thank you. And I want to complete the picture of the paper before I come to Andrey and back to Sandro to react. Janis, we heard there what this invisible ceiling is and your diagnosis, you and Corina's diagnosis of why it exists. In terms of what we need to do, in terms of recommendations, the paper contains a number. Can you just outline for us, in essence, and also expand a little bit perhaps on that link between the willingness to reform the EU's, what you call the EU's operating system, and the willingness to do something about this? Because Sandro made it clear just how much this matters for the future of European democracy.
Yeah, happy to do so. 3 points, 2 more general and 1 more specific. And the first general point relates to what you asked at the end. I think there needs to be a growing awareness of what the added value of citizens' participation can be. And I don't think that we have that general awareness. There still is a lot of skepticism vis-a-vis citizens' participation. Corina was already alluding some of the reasons of why there is the skepticism. And there's no awareness that not only can it help to modernize EU democracy, which is something which is necessary. Democracies always have to modernize, and that is one key element for modernizing, not in competition, but in addition to representative democracy, as Sandro was already alluding to. And it is also necessary if in order to move the EU forwards. If you see what kind of radical change we have in front of us, and that's, I think, why what was interesting that Sandro started by explaining what we all need to do at the European level in order to deal with the radical changes that are happening in front of our eyes. We need citizens' participation because without it, we will not be able to take some of the tough decisions that need to be taken. Second, I think that the awareness for the structural reasons why citizens' participation is hitting an invisible ceiling is important. There's a lot of discussion about how do we improve citizens' participation, and you need to have these discussions. But actually, if you see in practice, not only at the European, but also at many national levels, you see that citizens' participation is hitting an invisible ceiling because there is not a clear awareness of what the reasons are why we're hitting that ceiling. It is not because we haven't made it perfect in terms of how we conduct these citizens' participation. Is the fact that there are different actors who do not want citizens' participation to play a stronger role. So you need to have that awareness for the structural impediments, because that's the only way how you actually can then improve the current instruments of citizen participation, and that leads me to the third point, also to come forward with new elements of citizen participation at the European level. And we come forward with a couple of ideas. Let me mention them very briefly. The first one is what we call Big Tent Fora, where you bring together selected citizens from all over Europe, together with elected representatives from different EU levels, to discuss about what the strategic priorities of the EU should be. We should have done this time around. Every 5 years, we have a discussion about the strategic agenda of key political priorities. Why not have a discussion with citizens about what these priorities should be, but also not only involving European, but also regional, local, national policymakers. So have a mixture of people discussing. Second idea we bring forward, that whenever we have an agreement about what major transformative projects should look like in future. So after the EP elections, once we have the strategic agenda, once we have identified what the key strategic priorities should be, it should be a standard practice that we discuss these priorities at the local, the regional, the national, the European level with citizens from all over Europe to have a more inclusive debate about what needs to be done at the European level on the basis of what we have decided are the key priorities. Third, one idea is that we put forward is that if we have a stronger discussion about reforming the EU, as you said, reforming the EU's operating system, there's a room also for citizens' participation. So what we call for is a European Citizens Reform Panel to, in parallel to reforming the European Union, governance and policy reforms also involve citizens in the process. And last but not least, there's one huge challenge which we have in front of us, which is EU enlargement. If we're serious about EU enlargement, an EU of 30 plus member states, we should also involve citizens in that debate. So we call for a European Forum on enlargement to discuss together with citizens, by the way, from the countries who want to accede. So what we plead for is thinking enlarged, already think from a perspective of enlarging a union, involve them in these debates about enlargement, because this is going to be a real tough one, and we need to involve citizens also in these discussions.
Okay, thank you very much. So very much that different tools for different issues, different ways of using deliberative democracy. Andrey, from your perspective, just in terms of, would you echo what we've heard about why this issue matters so much, and in terms of how you see the challenge ahead? And then Sandro, I'd like to get your reaction, particularly on this issue of the multiple fears and concerns of the EU institutions. But Andrey, just in terms of the broad picture, why does what we're talking about so much? And do you share this analysis of why it's so difficult?
Thank you very much, Jacki. What a question to start the morning, Tuesday morning. Absolutely, and thanks to our authors. We've got a lot of food for thought and very convincing arguments, actually, why citizen participation could be, if not the buoy that saves the European Union from the perma-crisis or various crises that keep piling up, but could help to navigate through them. I think we also have heard a lot of arguments that we need the sense of ownership from the Europeans. We started our today's exchange with a couple of remarks about the Maastricht debates that took place yesterday. And this is the question that I woke up in the morning. Is this the disconnect that we're talking about? And is this actually the debate and involving citizens in the debate? Is this the instrument that this disconnect, with the help of which these disconnects could be overcome? And it's not only is this an issue of legitimacy, of course, right? Because Sandra was absolutely right by saying that without getting citizens into the discussion about whether we have a military union or not, those decisions cannot be simply taken. However, I'm talking about this, the delicate tissue of ownership that Europeans need to have over the whole project, over the process of European integration, and that ownership can only be achieved if citizens are deeply involved in discussing the directions and the outcomes, potential outcomes of the European integration process. So for me, and the consequences are also on the table, and I think we're all aware of the consequences, of the negative consequences, if citizens are not sufficiently involved, starting with growing distance, misunderstanding, diminishing loyalty, vacuum, which will readily be filled by radical forces and voices, and institutional erosion, and so on and so forth. So it's a lot at stake, I think, when citizens are not sufficiently involved.
Thank you very much. Sandro, talking here, and Janis was pointed to this conversation about how to improve citizens' participation, but the paper says, one of the things it says in analysing the invisible ceiling is that EU leaders, politicians have deliberately, if you like, put fences around some of these processes precisely to undermine them effectively. Say, okay, we'll do this, but various mechanisms, being unclear about the purpose, being unclear about what you'll do with the results. So a comment to that, if you would, because you said very clearly there is no alternative and any increase in the EU's competences must be accompanied by this, but not everyone agrees. And to that institutional problem, I mean, the paper argues the Commission fears its prerogatives might be undermined if it goes too far with this. The Council fears you, MEPs, and the Commission will use it, if you like, to foist things on them they don't want to do. Do you agree with that analysis of the political barriers to doing this better and taking it more seriously?
Yes, I do, and I would like to jump on a few points around this that I heard and that I share. First of all, yes, there are multiple fears, and in general, as in my experience in the council, as I've been in the council for a long time, and I also chaired the council during our presidency, the less we give out, the better. Out means the less we involve the European Parliament, the better. The less we involve citizen participation, the better, because, you know, it's so complicated already like that around the table among 27 leaders. Why should we bother to complicate further the matter with democracy, democratic participation, etc.? And you have the evidence of what I'm saying. I'm not saying because I'm in an electoral campaign. I'm saying because look at the lack of reaction of the Council to the recommendation of the Conference of the Future of Union. After all, the Conference of the Future of Union was the first attempt to organize a democratic participation exercise continent-wide. And the only institution which did not even pretend to engage in the follow-up was the Council. They kick the can down the road all the time. Because they think that it is a matter of complexity, and it is already complicated enough. From the Commission perspective, certainly the monopoly of the right of legislative initiative of the Commission play a role. On that, we have entered into a new historical phase, where certainly the Commission must keep the power of legislative initiative, but it cannot have the monopoly anymore. Because in this phase where we are, we talk about migration, we talk about rule of law, we talk about even some aspect of family rights, we talk about military power, we talk about things that requires another way also of elaborating the proposal. So it is clear that the Commission cannot have the monopoly. We have to enrich the legislative initiative, the political initiative, both with a right of legislative initiative of the Parliament and new form of democratic participation in proposals, organized, structured, organized at citizens level, like we did on the Conference of the Future of Union. Then another aspect which was mentioned I mean, as an obstacle was the issue of I think that Corina said very rightly that permissive consensus, it is gone in the last decade. I would say that it is gone in the last 20 years. I think that permissive consensus went into deep crisis with the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, because it is clear that at that time, many tough decisions, some of them wrong, were taken behind closed doors. Think about the role of the Eurogroup and the ECOFIN on the Greek crisis. I think that this way of tackling very important issues and taking very tough decisions for the ordinary life of many citizens, thinks of the Greek crisis, for example, without having a truly public debate, was one of the causes of the rise of populism and extreme right in Europe. And I think that we should also think about the consequences of not being democratic enough, not updating enough our way of organizing democracy at the continental level. And music for my ears as a candidate of the Democrat of Renew in this European election, because you say that you want to reform citizen participation panel, you want to involve regional and local players. This is exactly our proposal of the Citizens Agora. We propose to organize Agora of citizens every year. We propose between January and June to organize at least in each regional capital in Europe, at least, debate on the model of the Conference of the Future of Union, to listen to the proposal of each region, to organize debate also at national level, and this should prepare the State of the Union debate that each year in September is done in the Parliament, where the President of the Commission says what the Commission is going to propose for the following years in terms of policy initiative, in terms of legislative proposal. We would like, as Renew, to prepare this debate also with this form of citizen participation, organizing Agora, at least in each region of
Sandro,
the
Yeah,
goes
so
exactly
yeah.
in the right direction, which Janis was pointing out. Let me say also
Can I just
that
ask you, just linked to that though, Renew Europe very enthusiastic about this. You said it's not an alternative to traditional democracy, but it's vital. Not all of your colleagues in the parliament share that. There is this concern about it, you know, the threat, as it were, to representative democracy. We're the guys who are elected. Don't challenge that in any way. And given that, and what you said about the council's worried it's too, you know, it's already too difficult. The Commission's worried about its right initiative. How do you overcome those obstacles, those tall obstacles, as the paper calls it, and convince your colleagues in the different institutions that they really, whether they like it or not, as it were, this can be a positive, and they need to embrace it?
Well, I mean, I think that we have to use to persuade the previous example and what went wrong. For example, Janis was rightly talking about the need for an open debate on enlargement, as is totally right, because enlargement means a deep change in the way the union exists and functions. It's going to be transformed. And remember that the lack of a truly public debate in the previous enlargement, the one we are celebrating now, the enlargement of 2004, and I was there. I remember because I was one of the negotiators with the president of the Commission. But the lack of public debate in the key member state provoked the rejection of the constitutional treaty in 2005 in France on the Netherlands. I'm deeply convinced that the lack of debate and that citizen participation in general on the EU integration thing, but also the fact that without being properly informed and without having got the possibility of having a say on the ongoing enlargement negotiation, these were one of the two main causes of the rejection by the French of the constitutional treaty. You remember the fear of the Polish plumber. It is clear that if we don't want to repeat this experience with, in the future, the fear of the Ukrainian farmer, we have to convince within the parliament and the council that for the next enlargement, which is going to be a huge thing, we need to prepare it also in terms of public acceptance in a different way. I would say
a
that
very concrete example of why it makes a difference. Just to say, several people asking for the link to the paper. It is, if you click on answered in the Q&A section, the link is there, but you can also find it on the EPC website. You can find it on the Democracy Reform Observatory website. Andrey, just in terms of convincing the key players who need to address these multiple fears, to find a way forward, would you agree that the answer is, say, look, if you want to reform the EU, there will be referenda if we get to treaty change. If you want to enlarge the EU, you have to get, you talked about that buy-in. How important is this? And what would you say to politicians to convince them that they shouldn't just pay lip service to this, but actually could benefit from it?
Yeah, so the question is whether the politicians and decision makers actually understand the beauty of the strategic attitude towards citizen participation. That strategically, it's better, it could be better than having a referendum and failing actually at the referendum. And here I'm referring to this like trauma of previous constitutional discussions and reform and so on and so forth. I think our authors are making a very convincing argument that citizen participation as a strategic choice would be a better choice when it comes to avoid such failures. However, I think that if we are talking about the fears, and I think this is the underlying issue here, we also need to take into account that it's not only the fear of loss of power, because then the question arises, what power are they afraid to lose? The power to shape the debate, the power to shape the consensus, the power to forge the consensus, or some other power. It's also, I think, pretty rational fears or risk assessments, I would say, that the process of citizen participation can get out of hand and it could be hijacked by radical, let's say, radical forces and voices once the citizens are invited to deliberate on an important topic, and if those citizens are, let's say, invited via the method of random selection, right? So the process is it's the process that is not very prone to strong control and the directing from the onset. Yeah, so that's a rational fear, I think, also. And here, the power of persuasion is the only thing that that comes into my mind. Keep persuading that, yes, indeed, is a very risky endeavor. However, the more we experiment and the more we practice citizen participation, the better we see whether those fears and reservations are actually justified, and so on and so forth. So to me, the answer would be do more participation, paradoxically, ironically. Do more, learn more, and see how it works, right? And then reassess your fears and the risks that you associate with that.
Thank you very much. Janis and Corina, a word to this, and not just to the addressing of these fears and making the case for this, but also to what you call in the paper, and Corina referred to it, I'll come to Janis first this time, on the imagination deficit. How do we persuade politicians to be more imaginative? Janis.
I think if you want to persuade them, you need to convince them of the necessity of change. And if I link it to the current debate with respect to the European Parliament elections, some of the most difficult issues that need to be discussed are being avoided in the public debate. I've had a good number of exchanges with politicians who operate at the European but also at the national level with respect to the EP elections. And I was saying you need to have a frank debate about the major risks that we're facing, the major changes that are necessary. We need to talk about what it means when we need to play a stronger role when it comes to Europe's security and defense, because that has massive implications if you think it through. You need to openly discuss that enlargement is something which potentially will happen in future, and that also requires a huge amount of change at the European level. But we're avoiding these debates. We're trying to exclude these debates because there's a fear that these debates potentially might be hijacked. This is not my argument. This is the arguments I'm hearing. And there's a fear that they might be hijacked by radical forces on the left or on the right, populist forces who might be then using these debates in their interest, which potentially is true. But I think on the other hand, avoiding having these debates, the tough discussions about the future of Europe and the needs that will then include in reforming the EU, both in policy terms, but also in governance terms, trying to avoid these debates at the end of the day will not play out. But if you have an open discussion about these issues, if you confront them openly, if you are not fearful of confronting them, and if you have there comes the imagination word. If you have the imagination of thinking things differently in future rather than following old recipes, which we're currently doing, then you will also realize that you need to involve citizens more in these debates. So there is a clear link between, on the one hand, realizing what needs to be done at the European level, having an open and honest debate about it, which often will be a brutal discussion about what needs to be done, and the need and the potential of citizens' participation. So, if you ask people, why are they not ready to be more open when it comes to citizens' participation? You can also ask the same questions. Why are you not ready to actually reform the European Union? If you answer that question, you will also realize that you need to get citizens more involved in these processes, not because they are, the panacea, the silver bullet, everything's then solved, but you need to have them involved in these processes, because if you want to have radical change at the European, at the national level, you will have to have citizens on board. So you cannot avoid these debates, which we're trying, this is my diagnosis, to avoid, which I think is the wrong thing to do.
Thank you. And Corina, on this point, and I'm wondering if part of the issue here to address some of these fears, one of the things you say, the criticisms of previous exercises have been unclear purpose. What are we trying to do? What is the objective? What will we do with the results? For you, is part of the answer now to addressing these fears to really make sure everyone gets on the same page about what it's for, and how it will be used, and therefore reassure people about concerns about the link, whether it's a threat to anybody's powers or to representative democracy itself. Is that part of the answer, do you think?
Potentially, but I would say that it's also okay not to know at this point what we really want to do in terms of having the ready-made solution. I think the point of the whole citizen participation discussion and the debate we're having today is also to highlight the importance of the process and the fact that we actually are together in this. We're together in this, politicians and citizens. We're together in this, EU member states and enlargement countries. We're together in this, and we need to figure it out together, basically. And it's normal in the face of change. It's human nature, I would say, to feel frightened, to feel scared of change, right? And I think the tendency is normally it can go in two ways. We have a stark choice in front of us. Either you're afraid and you retreat into a destructive and primitive instinct. You basically turn against democracy by radicalizing, or else you accept that, well, change is happening. I need to adapt to it. I need to react to it. And in that sense, something's going to have to give, which is that you're going to have to change the way you think about things, the way you do things. You basically need to reform democracy in keeping with the times. And so these are the choices we're facing. So together, we need to figure out which is the path we want to go down on. Do we want to turn against democracy, or we do want to reform democracy? And once you made that decision, little by little, I'm sure that we, with the courage to accept that change is inevitable, and with the courage to try and err, we're not going to get it right the first time around. I think little by little, we're going to figure out the exact steps. It's new for everybody, I would say. But I hope this answers your question, but then I wanted to add a couple of things to what has been said before, because the first is to say that for me, in terms of the response, it's not only about, well, deciding that now after the EP elections, we're going to do X or Y or Z. Is also understanding that there's a number of prerequisites, no matter what the concrete steps of this roadmap are for how to improve participatory democracy at the EU level and reform democracy. And those two prerequisites for me include, and these prerequisites for me include two at least. The first has to do with the fact that, unlike in the past, we really need to make sure that there is interinstitutional agreement behind this effort of fostering a greater participatory democracy at the EU level. We need all institutions and bodies on board with this, because otherwise the process, the different experiments that we do will not have the intended effect. The input that citizens provide will not be used by all of the actors in the system, and that is a waste in a sense. So the interinstitutional support and for this effort needs to be there following the elections. And the second is that we shouldn't focus on trying to figure out one specific permanent instrument and call it a solution to it. I don't know if such a silver bullet exists. I think we need to be open-minded about the fact that we need citizens' participation at different stages for different purposes, and different methods for citizen participation should be, it's not just an agora, it's not just an assembly, it's not just a focus group. These consultations have to become sort of an instinctive go-to.
Okay, I want to come back on where we go from here in a moment. And Sandro, I think you want to react to that, but if it's about where we go from here, can I just take a couple of questions from the audience, and then I'll give you a chance to react on that. Yep. Just want to questions and comments. Someone saying, in order to convince politicians, would it be worth talking about citizen participation versus current electoral democracy, not as a zero-sum power game, but as an investment in further legitimacy, support, and therefore also power of politicians? And there's a link if anyone's interested to a couple of reports. Another comment from someone concerned about that we make sure it is genuine participation, saying, You know, we have to make sure it's not voices that are only the activists. This is one of the concerns Andrey said people had, and is not representative of the broader public. But the question to you, Sandro, linked to the question of the Citizens Agora, and there were two questions really, linking the whole Citizens Agora issue. Can it serve as a bridge to bridge the democratic deficit if citizens' participations in European elections remains rather low in several countries? Do you see a link between those two? And secondly, can the Agora serve as a platform to voice the grievances of vulnerable groups across the EU, such as ethnic minorities, among others? So there's questions there about whose voices and this link between the elections turnout. Sandro, specifically to you on the Agora, please.
Yeah, of course, there is no silver bullet. But in Europe and in politics, in democracy, you have always to start with something and to proceed with something else. So it is clear that the democratic participation and modernizing democratic participation cannot rely only on one single instrument. We haven't solved the issue at European level with the Conference of the Future of Union. We don't solve it once for all with the Agora. But to launch a process like the Agora that we propose, that means every year, for 4 months, to have a debate on Europe at local regional level open to citizen participation would help a lot to raise awareness and to prove by results that the way forward. So let's pay attention to not throw the baby with the bathwater. Agora is not the silver bullet, but would be a very interesting and useful bullet. This is what I'm convinced of. To Janis, because I saw also the question that yes, it is clear that both are absolutely necessary. We have to work to increase the turnout in the European election, and in parallel, we have to try to bridge the deficit also by organizing a new form of citizens' debate and participation. From this perspective, I agree with Finn. This is exactly what I said, what we all said in the introduction of this debate. It is not a zero-sum game, it is a positive-sum game. It is not because we want to more citizen participation that we don't believe anymore in representative democracy. It's because we believe in democracy. And we understand that representative democracy must be strengthened. It's not enough in itself anymore, that we want to promote new form of citizen participation. The selection is the key. We have to organize processes in which we do not have the usual suspect that participate and full stop. We have to find way of selection in order to have the pluralism of our societies really represented in the consultation processes. Sometimes when we have done this kind of exercise in the past at European level, there were only, I mean, the European organized civil society, and the criticism was that they are all the same. It is clear that the issue of selection continent-wide to ensure a pluralism, a real pluralistic participation, it is absolutely key. And last but not least, the question of I think it was of Laurie. Yes, it is clear that once that we organize this new form of debate at local level, any issue on which the EU can have a say is open to discussion. So of course that the right of minorities and the issue of minorities in Europe at national level, at regional level, could be part of this debate. And everything indeed, the union can do should be debated also in this Agora.
Thank you. And indeed, Max Steuer has added in terms of the voices, also talking about explicitly advocating for including non-European citizens, migrants and refugees and other often neglected communities who are nevertheless part of Europe, says Max, and have a stake in Europe. So this issue of who we use it, not just what do we talk about, but how do we involve those key groups and give them a voice. I want to turn now to where we go from here. And Corina began to outline, she talked about the importance, Sandro, and I'm going to come to Sandro and then Andrey on this and get Corina and Janis to react. But Corina talked about the importance of getting this interinstitutional agreement. And she talked about, don't think of it as one instrument, but these different types of instruments. There is, Sandro, we haven't talked about it, but the European Commission of the three institutions has advanced most in this area with their European citizens panels on key legislative proposals, but there's no guarantee that that might last into the next commission. We don't know what the new parliament's attitude will be in terms of, if you like, a political roadmap for making progress on addressing the issues you've all been raising, because you've all underlined how important it is. What do you see as the key next steps in order to do that? And how can we move towards that interinstitutional agreement, do you think, as we go into the next legislative cycle? Sandro first.
Yeah, I would say that, and this is also our proposal as Renew Democrats, is that we should commit the new president of the Commission and the new Commission to engage formally on building up these new processes. So that should be, in our view, one of the conditions to support and to elect the new president of the Commission, as we did in 2019 with the Council of the Future of Union. It was a clear demand that we made as Renaissance, as Renew. We had proposed it on the 2nd of March 2019, and we had imposed it as a condition to support Ursula von der Leyen. We should apply the same in the light also of the experiences and of the good aspect and the negative aspect of the experiences of the Conference of the Future of Union. We should do the same with the new Commission. So at least to ensure a commitment of the Commission toward the citizens and toward the Parliament. Then certainly, I think that there are many reasons, not only the issue of citizen participation, to update the existing interinstitutional agreement between the Commission and the Parliament. We should try to enlarge it to the Council. That is going to be very difficult. Because we don't have, whereas we have the means of imposing something politically to the Commission before to elect the President of the College, we don't have the means to impose something to the Council, but we have to persuade the Council that this aspect should also be part of a new interinstitutional understanding or agreement between the three institutions. It won't be easy, because if you look at the way of many governments, I mean, it's not because I'm elected in France, but except the French government, a few other governments. What are the governments who really made an effort to inform their citizens about the Conference of the Future of Union? They pretended. Of course, the media also ignore it largely, the Conference of the Future of Union. And that was the biggest failure. Because if we had a strong media interest about what has been going on in Europe for 1 year and a half, today, our debate on how to strengthen and formalize new form of citizen participation in Europe would be much easier. But the fact that the government has tried to hide basically what was going on, and the media were too lazy to go to deepen the analysis. And I always say to journalists, but why don't you ask this young lady from Germany, this is a retirement from France? Why don't you go to see that bank employee from Estonia? What do they do here? Why they accepted to spend 1 year, I mean, to spend few weekends in 1 year of their time going around the European capitals, meeting our citizens and discussing about what they want for Europe. This is already something very new. We have never done it continent-wide, this. Never. But it was a deliberate strategy of many governments and a deliberate laziness of many media not to talk about that. So this is also something, because, and I was sure that was a strategy, because the Council didn't want the Conference of Union to be a public known success. Because now people like me we would have got much stronger weapons to push on the Council to commit formally in the next term.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Just Edmund Grace, you did have your hand raised, but you very kindly also put it in the chat. And as we don't have very long, let me just read out your comment, because it links to where do we go. Edmund says there are two issues: EU institutional reform and building democratic legitimacy. For reform to command popular trust, it needs to set local processes as the priority. Without this at national and European, these processes at national and European level, people will soon become jaded, as has been the case, says Edmund, with Citizens Assembly. There's also a question about the European Citizens Initiative. Come back to that if we can. But Andrey, in terms of where we go from here and how we ensure that with all of the imperfections, with all the problems we have faced, the progress that has been made in building these tools, in experimenting with these tools, is not lost as we move into the next 5-year cycle. What do you see as the way forward?
Yeah, Jacki, and I would like also to elaborate slightly to add to what Corina has said about these two conditions, namely all institutions on board and one specific, they should not be one specific permanent instrument. I think one important condition that we, it's not that we are overlooking that, but it's kind of in the back of our minds, is that political imagination, if we're talking about the lack of political imagination, tends to increase and sometimes run wild if there is more bottom pressure. And it's a little bit of a criticism directed also at us in civil society. Citizen participation is a difficult cause to fight. However, citizen participation would need the help from organized civil society and this bottom-up pressure to become a political demand, organically become a political demand, and to acquire via contestation with the help of civil society this flare of the demand, of political demand. So I think the bottom-up pressure, the increase of bottom-up pressure is very important here if we answer the question where we go from here. And a kind of boring comment on the institutional entry points. As you rightly noticed, Jacki, the Commission has already been done something, and I genuinely believe in the power of institutional entry points, even if those institutional entry points are created and for some time they're not being used by actors to contest, to advance their claims, and so on and so forth. You know, Chekhov was right. If there is a gun on the stage, at some point it should fire, right? So I think at some point, and this is what we also learn from unfortunate experiences in other countries, institutional entry points get used and at some point become important. So that for me justifies their importance. There should be more. There should be better rules. There should be clearer rules. They should be. We see actually how the European Citizen Initiative is moving. The use of European Citizen Initiative is moving actually to a different level. It's an instrument which we, for a very long time, believed would never be used as actively as it's actually used now. There is a contestation around that. There are actors who are claiming that the European Citizen Initiative should be taken more seriously, that the parliament should be involved more seriously. I think this illustrates for me the road forward. The better rules, more rules as possible, and that will gradually push the situation forward, in my opinion.
I want to come to Janis because Corina, then I want to get you to react because you gave us those clear benchmarks of where you think we should go. Let me just throw a couple of things into the mix in the meantime. Konstantin Schiffer says, wouldn't the next multi-annual financial framework be the ideal occasion to have a Europe-wide citizen debate on the future direction and priorities of the EU, such as happened during the conference on the future of Europe? A one-year process starting next year could give the EU institutions some indication, leverage and legitimacy for their own negotiations. Link that very much to what Corina said. One of her two recommendations for the way forward was don't try to focus on figuring out one instrument, your multiple instruments, and Janis, you outlined them at the beginning. Is that part of the answer to the way forward, to say, what should we talk about next? What can we use this tool for? How do you see the key next steps after the elections, Janis?
Well, first of all, I already indicated in my first answer what needs to be done based on also our reflections in the paper. But let me give a political answer to this question. Because what's the problem and who are the problematic actors? We have a European Parliament that very much reacted to what the proposals were from the Conference on the Future of Europe, even asking for radical reforms, including a convention. So how you have a European Parliament. Now, we know that not everyone in the European Parliament is a staunch supporter, but there has been a European Parliament majority asking for this. You have a European Council and Council which did not react and wants to avoid having a higher level of citizens' participation because they fear that that might put them into the corner, that might squeeze them politically, and they want to avoid that. And that's also why the Conference on the Future of Europe was constructed the way it was constructed, because there would have been better ways of doing it, which, by the way, also Sandro would have attracted more interest from the media. And these things were discussed before the conference even started, but there was no support for that from the member states. And more or less, we are at a similar level today. You need to put pressure on the Council, on the European Council. And now the third actor, the European Commission, is being afraid of being squeezed between the European Parliament and the council. So if you look into the ideas related to internal reform roadmap, which this commission came forward with is extremely low when it comes to the level of ambition, and when it comes to citizen participation, it's just nothing. So Sandro is right. You will have to have the European Parliament, the next European Parliament, putting pressure on the next Commission president, on the next Commission, to be more ambitious when it comes to citizens' participation and EU reform in general. But the key problem is the Council, is the European Council. And you need to get the European Council and the Council moving when it comes to reforming the European Union. And what we're seeing currently is no readiness to move in this direction. So the question is, how do you create pressure at the Council level, at the European Council level? How do you create a certain momentum to keep at least the discussion going and also involving the Council in this? This is why we, some while ago, called for a wise women's group, which should identify what the key priorities and reforms needed are, and have the Council committing, the European Council committing to this.
Okay.
Will this be enough? No. Is there a need for more? Yes. But you need to get things moving, and the pressure needs to be on the Council and the European Council.
Okay, thank you. Corina, you talked about what needs to be done. I'd like to come back to Sandro in a minute Sandro talked about the pressure you can put on the Commission. I'm wondering what pressure he thinks the Parliament can put on the Council. But Corina, anything you would add in terms of the way forward? And just if we can very briefly touch on this question from Carsten Berg saying, how do you suggest to improve the European Citizens Initiative? How about combining successful ECIs with randomly selected European citizens panels? Is that the sort of innovative thinking we need?
Sure. I mean, it's something that has been part of the discussion and part of the array of solutions proposed. And I think, yes, we should try to link things. Why? I mean, when we discuss about how to get all the actors and the stakeholders involved and committed to this, it's a good idea to try to link instruments, to try to link levels, to try to link events that are happening on the same subject matters. It's good to try to find the difficult conversations that need to be approached through collective thinking and cooperation. So yes, I wouldn't be against such an idea for sure. One thing that and the same for the other question on the multi-annual financial framework. I mean, that's another amazing opportunity to get citizens involved. And I think, look, in a sense, again, I come back to the idea that perhaps it's not all that strange that things are happening the way they're happening. It would almost be abnormal if such thing existed, if abnormal exists, to have everybody suddenly be supportive of an idea and run with the idea of reform. So it's normal that there are some hesitation, there's some cautiousness in the system, and yes, we have a parliament that has been very ambitious in its proposals and have very courageous and very outspoken, but then again, it hasn't been the actor that has done the most. The most so far, I would argue, has been the Commission. So somebody has acted a lot, somebody has talked a lot, somebody has been on the reserve. Now, potentially by continuing to try and err and do better next time and mean it, because it's important to mean it. We shouldn't do these kind of things, whether we do ECIs, whether we do multi-annual financial framework, whether we do priorities, transition issues, whatever we do, we shouldn't do them for the sake of doing them. We should do it because we mean it, because we want to exploit to the fullest the potential of this instrument and utilize their added value. So, and little by little, the others will hopefully warm up. One final sentence, if I may, it links to the fact that, and I want to remind this and highlight this because I think maybe it's been a little bit under the radar in our discussion, is the fact that these instruments do not only help to improve decision-making and legitimacy, they also help to raise awareness among citizens about who the EU is, what the EU does, how things function, and why certain decisions are taken. And this is crucial for closing closing that gap with the citizens and for getting citizens then to also vote. That's an answer to the previous
earlier question. Indeed. We are almost out of time, and you've been very clear on where you think we need to go from here. I want to just come back to Sandro, 2 questions. Sandro, the one about the council, and you talked about how you will be, the demands you will make of a new commission president and make that part of the deal, if you like, for getting approved. Do you see a way to put pressure on the council as well? Because I think when we talk about the invisible ceiling, that's the brick one, by the sound of everything you've all said. And there's a couple of questions just relating to the role of civil society in all of this and how to mobilize civil society and how important its role might be. And someone says, how about setting up a working group, including all stakeholders, including civil society, institutions and citizens who've been involved in previous consultations, to make the point and understand what is possible within the current framework. So whether you see a role alongside all of you, the role of think tanks in all of this, the role of civil society, but crucially, how do we get the council to move on this?
Well, I think that we should put in pressure on the council by acting. So we should get the commitment of the commission to go along this new form of citizen participation. From our perspective, we think that the Agora, which is a sort of development of the Conference of the Future of Union, and that should be structured every year for 4 or 5 months in view of the State of the Union debate, would be a very good way by doing to show that this is possible and this is necessary, this can work. And I think that we should commit both as Parliament and the Commission to table legislative proposal which ensure a follow-up to the main demands of this Agora. In this way, we certainly would put a pressure on the Council because the initiative would be the follow-up of the citizens' demand. And then we should see either whether we launch a convention, and that would be already a place where we should even modify the treaty to strengthen the citizen participation form. Think of strengthening and make it easier the European Citizen Initiative. Think of also codifying new form of democratic participation. That would be one process. The other process would be to see whether we can put a pressure on the Council. Imagine the budgetary yearly budget procedure, and to try to use that to get some commitment by the Council to ensure a citizens' debate on the new multi-financial framework, as has been mentioned. I think that we should look around this new Agora initiative. We should look what are the procedural and political point of strength for us to put pressure on the Council by taking specific initiative. Because to open a general debate on the Council on this issue, like we have done this morning, it won't work. We have to use other way to prove that it is possible, prove it is efficient, and therefore increasing the pressure on the Council, knowing that within the Council we have some allies. Because after all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandro.
Thank you.
And thank you again for being with us today in the midst of the hectic campaign season. Thank you to you all for a great discussion. I'm sure we're going to come back on this. Our next democracy reform conversation will take place the day before voting opens. So we will meet on June the 5th. Voting opens, as you all know, on June the 6th. So I'm sure we will come back to this issue of what happens post-election and how indeed those elections might influence this discussion. But thank you very much for now. The link to the paper, as I say, is in the chat. You can also find it on the EU Democracy Reform Observatory website and on the EPC website. Thank you, all of you, for a great discussion. Thank you, audience, for joining us, and have a very good rest of the day. Goodbye.
Yep.